Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for Joel.
Yeah, thank you very much. So thank you for joining the session today. I'm Joel. I'm one of the founders of B2B Marketing. And the thing about this session is this is an experiment. I mean, actually, I watched Carla do it a couple of years ago, and she didn't fall over, so it must be okay. We're going to record this session. It's going to be then available as a podcast as well. So please don't leave the room right now. There's a lot of value in staying here for this, but we hope you're going to enjoy this session. And it's going to be about the increasingly challenging role of advertising. And the title, as you can see, is "Ignorance is Not Acceptable in Digital Advertising." So what I'd like to do is welcome my two contributors, my guests to the stand. And Paul Collier and Preeti Saini. Come and have a seat, and we'll introduce you. So this is a live. If you're listening to a recording of this is a live environment. We're at B2B Marketing Ignite. It's the 2nd of July. It's busy, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got to say yes, Joel. Yes,
yes,
it is.
It's extremely busy. It's packed, actually, standing room only.
It's good, which is good to see. So thank you for joining us today. And we're going to talk today, and we want this to be an interactive session, so we'd love to get your questions, and what's been apparent to me is that there is, the title is obviously deliberately provocative, right? The world of digital advertising is constantly evolving, but it's been increasingly apparent there's some challenges associated with that. And I think that and talking to Paul and his colleagues at Funnel Fuel in recent weeks and months, it's become apparent that whilst there was a degree of people could pretend this wasn't happening, it's now increasingly apparent they can't do that anymore, and it's important to get on board with this. So I'll start with let's get you guys to introduce yourselves in a bit more detail. Preeti, tell us a bit what your role is at IFS. What is it you do? What you're responsible for? It's a global team, isn't it?
It is, and I look after our global marketing functions. We're there to support our field organisations, our field marketeers, to go and drive demand, but equally make sure as a business that we are driving the right agenda from some of our strategic imperatives, which is around our brand positioning, and digital marketing plays a huge part in that. So that's me.
But obviously part of your world, you're looking to get the best out of this as a channel, as an investment in your marketing, right?
Absolutely, and the challenge around both how we appear organically, but also, where we put our money and make sure that our investment comes through.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you, Preeti. Paul, tell us a bit about you.
Well, my favourite subject myself. 25 years plus client side. Started off sort of Fortune 50 big tech companies, and then moved into the software industry. And then the last 6 years has been a sort of consulting freelance CMO. But then during that period, working with the co-founders of Funnel Fuel to set the business up, and I'm now the CMO of Funnel Fuel.
Okay, so we'll talk about Funnel Fuel because we'll talk about the embed that in the conversation. We'll tease that as it goes forward. But let's address the issue first of all. So the issue is that there's some inefficiencies in basically advertising spend. Essentially, efficiencies might be a very polite way of describing it. They're probably more brutal ways of doing it. But Paul, you brought this to my attention about 9 months ago, something like that?
First conversation we had was 18 months ago. I know you don't remember it. It wasn't that impactful, quite clearly, but it was about 18 months.
Both of my age, certainly. I can't actually remember how long. I think that was last week, wasn't it? Tell us a bit about when you first became aware of this as a challenge, and perhaps you can...
I think my personal journey was on the client side as a regional VP, regional CMO. The kind of standard marketing mix. I had responsibility for the entire function, the entire P&L, in terms of revenue generation, pipeline generation. There was a sales organisation that closed deals, board meetings, that sort of stuff. And I went into one board meeting one year, one autumn, with a flatlining digital footprint with no explanation. And my agencies at the time couldn't offer an explanation. At that time, Dan Shaw, who's the co-founder and CEO, was one of those agency groups. He was not responsible for the problem. But that was quite an uncomfortable experience. But I didn't know what was going on. So going forward, I think it was probably 6 or 7 years, we were having a discussion about if we were given the opportunity, the right people with tech and maybe some budget, what could we do to make a difference? It was then he brought back that experience and said, did you actually understand what was going on? And the painful thing for me was I didn't have a clue. The marketing mix I was responsible for, digital was a percentage, and I had agencies and other parties. But he then lifted the veil, as it were, in terms of what was going on behind the scenes with my spend as a client-side marketeer. And the answer to could we do something about this was literally, give me a year, I'll come back, yes, we can in the future. So that was the genesis of Funnel Fuel.
So you built this company which helps to expose that. But let's just, and that's fantastic for positioning. Let's just talk a bit more about the problem itself, though, as well, because you said there that you couldn't, in that moment, you couldn't see where investment was going. But it wasn't just that moment, was it? Right? There was it's probably been going on longer than you realised, or there's a lack of transparency longer than you realised. And what have you learned about where that money,
I've learned it's quite uncomfortable to look into that lens to a point, but at the same time, there's loads of opportunities to make it better.
Right.
What I didn't know was where the money was truly going.
Yeah.
If I was giving $10 into the digital advertising supply chain, how much was actually being used at the end result in terms of putting an ad or a creative in front of my target audience? I didn't have that economic path. And subsequently, I've seen a lot of research where that path is very opaque.
Yeah.
And the metrics afterwards and through the path is very opaque as well. And so it told me, informed me I had a high degree of ignorance, but I only found out retrospectively after failing in certain areas.
Okay.
And so if we have the opportunities we've done to try and do a better job for B2B, because it's a B2C predicated platform, the internet, the advertising supply chain, that was one of the missions that Dan set out, and the co-founders, Mike.
Okay. So that's fantastic. There's lots of segues from that one. We're places we go to it. But Preeti, let's tell us about you. You're in role currently. You're experiencing this challenge right now. What does Paul said relate to you? What's your situation, and how are you? To what extent do you see parallels in what Paul's just said there?
I think for me, actually, I've become more aware of this as I've come into my current role at IFS. So previously to that, I was marketing in fintech and often considered quite a niche industry. So in terms of digital advertising, very rare, just because of the nature of the industry, that's potentially changing or has changed. But coming into IFS, where we serve multiple industries, 6 core industries, a huge target addressable market, imprinting or making sure that people are aware of our brand, and it's one of our challenges that we continue to invest in, is paramount. So digital advertising for us has been quite a strong channel, but how that channel performs and how we can prove the value in terms of ROI. I mean, we've talked about commercial marketeers this morning. Yeah. That's hard, right? And I think a big piece of education in terms of, it shouldn't just be a tick in the box activity. And quite a lot of companies start out like that. Like, we need to make sure, we've got that box covered. Let's do some digital advertising. It will get in front of the audience that we need to. And we're all good. Yes, you start like that. But if we consider budgets, we go back to all of the economic impact, which, isn't all silver lining at the moment, as we've just heard. There's pressure about where you put your money and how that money performs. So you've no longer got the luxury of just ticking the box.
One of the things that always occurs to me about B2B marketing, and I've been doing this for 20 years, right? And it's a fascinating rabbit hole and work, all these different topics, subtopics that you can go down. And the expression that always occurs to me, that resonates with me, is marketers, particularly marketing leaders, need to know enough to be dangerous, right? Yeah. You can't know everything about everything. And if somebody says, don't worry, in safe hands, we're dealing with it, it's fine, that's good enough for a lot of people, isn't it, most of the time? But I guess there's a point where you then have to provide more scrutiny and think, am I getting the best for this? Am I getting the maximum out of this I could?
And it's interesting, most of the time, and my, again, more recent experiences, especially if you're a company that's not able to invest loads, if you're not an SAP or Microsoft or Salesforce, you've got to make that budget go quite far. Yeah. So just saying, it's working isn't good enough. How that translates into something that your CFO, your CEO will back, and effectively that is, how is that bringing pipeline? How is that pipeline then closing? And that's what's, going back to your original question, that's how I've had to get closer to it. That's how us as a marketing organisation have got close to it and, experienced, the challenges that Paul has raised. There is a lack of transparency, which needs to be addressed.
And I think, again, from a personal legacy, it kind of worked historically. The industry, the technology, and the main players have changed dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years and are continuing to change. We spent a lot of time last year talking about the cookieless environment, what that was going to deliver or not deliver as a problem or opportunity. Well, Google have changed their mind for one reason or another, and everyone's wasted 2 years trying to prepare for something. It's not just about Google. There are other situations where our ability from a digital perspective to identify a buying group and go and target them and then execute is being defined by other parties. And my sort of hobby horse here, I'm holding the stake as it were, is we need to take back some control because it's not going to work as it did in the past. It's not working as well as it does now. It's becoming more difficult. Privacy classically has made it much more difficult to identify individuals, let alone buying groups, and then go and target them and deliver marketing messages, let alone measuring what happens afterwards. The various aspects of the entire industry in this sector, in this part of the marketing mix that are changing. It worked in the past with a small W. We didn't know any better. It's kind of a bit cathartic going and talking to other client marketeers and they're kind of going, yeah, I'm kind of ignorant as well. Can you help out? It's such a changing dynamic landscape, literally month on month. And I'm learning so much because I'm not a technical person in any way, shape or form. We can't accept what has been will be successful moving forward. We have to lean into it.
It is ironic, isn't it? One of the very first expressions or quotes anybody knows about marketing is I know half my advertising is wasted, I just don't know which half. And that's really just come home to roost right now. Maybe more than half, I don't know.
I do think that while there's no silver bullet in terms of a tech platform which will give you all of the answers, we have evolved a lot in what information that we have got access to. Data is our biggest challenge and it's also our biggest opportunity.
Yeah.
Certainly in our case, we've had to almost take different sets of data. Some of it integrates well with our platforms and MarTech stacks are beautifully integrated. But the reality is a big part of it isn't. So actually taking different data sets and sort of looking at what's the pattern here, right? And this is absolutely a use case for AI and how AI should be getting smarter. Whole different topic.
Yeah.
But what is it telling us? So yes, somebody might have engaged here, and this is the case in our brand advertising campaign. Someone's engaged, but we've also got word of mouth feedback. We've also seen some engagement in another platform. We've got to piece that together to tell the story that, yeah, that opportunity in pipeline was influenced because they did this, and this. And you've, like it or not, that's our position today.
We need to do that, don't we? We need to attribute, we need to be able to show evidence to justify ourselves. And consigning bigger and bigger parts of our marketing budget to a black box that we don't understand, it feels increasingly non-viable, in my opinion. Perhaps we can talk a bit about, Paul, about why it's just kind of we are where we are with this now, because I think we've addressed part of it is ignorance on the part of marketers, and I mean that with all kind of familiarity. I'm very ignorant of this, and I've made my business to understand most areas of what B2B does. I think it's partly my perspective because that part of the industry has been a bit like, nothing to see here, walk away. Tell me a bit about your perspective about why this has emerged from the sense of structure of the industry.
Yeah, this could be quite controversial in some ways, so I'll try and tone it down a
No,
little bit.
Keep going.
My personal take on this, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I believe passionately we can do and we are doing better. This entire part of our marketing mix is predicated on a B2C model. And this is the controversial bit. It's being developed from a B2B perspective largely in spite of the client-side marketeer. The agencies, the ad tech system has developed from a client-side B2C model, and it's been in some cases engineered or cobbled together for B2B purpose. And from my previous point, it kind of worked. I think the B2B client marketeers are becoming much more savvy to our discussions and the keynote this morning. There are certain innovations and certain opportunities to improve with net new things, but getting the basics right or doing better with the basics. You're probably going around your marketing mix and looking at each aspect as a part of a natural business at the moment and the cost pressures, the resource constraints. This is one area where we haven't really had to look into it that much. Those factors in the past I've just talked about, combined with the realization that we can do better, is leading to a lot of inspection, or at least, I hope, going back and looking at our own values and our own beliefs. I've certainly gone through that process and realized how ignorant I was. I didn't have to do that when I was on the client side. But I'm definitely seeing it as a groundswell of focus or a new focus in the last couple of years on the client-side marketeer. You saw Gartner came out with their CMO survey 2 weeks ago. Biggest spend is in digital activity, digital marketing, and within that, it's paid media. And it's now number 2 in the top list of all the marketing areas. because it's becoming more expensive, and there are negative problems if you get it wrong.
Yeah.
And there's been some horrific things in the public in terms of brand safety and that sort of stuff. So there's that potential pitfall, but there are massive opportunities with new technology coming on board, out of home, some of the stuff I've seen you guys do, CTV, audio. There are lots of problems, but there are huge opportunities as well.
So it's great because we're saying that this is a problem. This is something we haven't really understood or addressed properly for good reason. But actually, the positive spin on this is that the world's changing and there's opportunities to do it better. And your point about data is really fundamental. I guess it's also one of the challenges. Also, kind of, I don't know, either of you got a perspective on this. Is into the players in the industry. You know, there's agencies and vendors and client teams, how they work together, and potentially a lot of that's been outsourced to the agency, and it's not been perhaps the clarity. I mean, I don't know whether that's becoming, again, I don't have the clarity of this, is becoming less common, as is more of that being taken on board. I mean, performance marketing is obviously much more of an internal marketing team activity than it was.
I think certainly in our case, control is quite important on the client side. And so, yeah, the easy thing is like just give it to an agency and deal with it. But I don't think we can afford that ignorance of not knowing, which is why we're having this discussion. You know, and our model has been, yes, we need to go to agencies who know what they're doing, the expertise is there, but we need to stay close to the results. And actually, speaking for ourselves, I know we're putting that pressure on agencies to say, like, I don't just want to see, you know, the impression data or, you know, how many eyeballs. Yeah, that's great, but that doesn't land with our business. And I certainly know with our, you know, some of our work with Funnel Fuel and, you know, some of our digital agencies, we're having the conversation around, like, not conversion from a media perspective, but conversion into our funnel. And how are you going to prove that? Yeah. So to give that all to an agency isn't our model, and I don't think it will be. Or
at least without the ability to have someone internally to be able to kind of translate it.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that's part of the problem and the opportunity. It does depend on your resources within your own organisation. If you've got and it is skilled professionals because it is such an evolving area. Equally, there are some really great agencies in the room here and in the event today who also recognise that they need to bring expertise in, maybe where they haven't done that in the past. We've got a very strong agency business within our own company, as well as direct companies who have got the resources in-house, but want to lean on some of the expertise just to help them curate and execute and measure, but want to activate it themselves. I spoke to one major tech company about 18 months ago who's used the phrase, and it was superb. He said, we recognised we weren't in control of our digital destiny, so we need to take it back. And they planned a 5-year journey. They're going very, Fortune 50 company. And it was one of those conversations as to what was the catalyst for that change in mindset, the path you're on. And it was, well, we have a new VP came from one of the major players and opened the doors as to what was actually going on. So we're taking some control back. But not all vendors can do that. Not all client-side marketers can do that because the resources are scarce because it's a very skilled area and it's evolving so quickly. I'm certainly one of those people that outsourced it because they didn't have the expertise in-house. And it was quicker to activate that way, to be frank. If I was in that position today, I would probably be looking at a different approach, hybrid with agencies, or even bring it in-house where appropriate. But I think the inspection's got to start that process.
So there's a different lens being put on this, a different set of explanations about what good might look like, and just going, all yours, thank you very much. We talked about, so we defined the problem, and Dave, we'll come to you in a second if that's all right. We talked about the kind of, definitely defined the nature of the problem that we've got here, which is that we've to a great extent we've been ignorant. And part of that's been due to efficiency. I'm going to have to put it on the table, though, that there's an element of suspicion that it's been willful on the part of some players. Am I being nefarious here? Am I being appropriate? Preeti, I wouldn't necessarily expect you to comment on this because it's a challenge.
You give it to me, thanks. Go for it. There are some controversial views about the wastage in the supply chain. There's a lot of opinions. I'm kind of the opinion that the wastage has been allowed because no one inspected it and no one challenged it. Right. And I come from a large tech company that used to do a lot of great business in new sectors because they improved the supply chain on a regular basis, a company called Dell. And what they saw in supply chain was, this supply chain is not optimal, we can do better. They made a fantastic business at doing that. And that sort of analogy is where I think the supply chain here has been wasteful. There are views as to how wasteful it is, but the reality is we can do better. So let's do better. So if I keep sort of looking backwards and pointing fingers, you're just going to fall over as you move forward.
The frustrated tabloid hack within me obviously wants to dig the dirt and name some names, but Paul very adeptly sidestepped. So
I'll send you some links later.
Okay, so David had a question about David. As we put this a podcast, you tell us who you are first of all. Oh, sorry, we need to get a microphone to you. I do apologise. Sorry.
Hi, this is Søren from the Export and Investment Fund of Denmark. And I was just wondering how, if you could elaborate a little bit on how to take back that control and how to make data meaningful in our digital advertising, if that's the clue.
And I think so. I think there's a wider question in terms of you. And I talk about the company's or an individual's attitude to change. It was mentioned earlier in the keynote about approaching. I think it was Sarah from Capgemini is on a transformation program, and something stimulated her to this morning to send an email to her team and go, "We're pivoting," because this was been whatever the email was or the research that she wrote, the research that she read. I think the first thing to do is just challenge what you've been doing and why you've been doing it, what you know about what you've been doing. Very broad statement, but that's what I had to go through personally, which is I thought I was the best marketeer in the room because I knew everything. There's a veneer over that. But when someone showed me how much I didn't know, that was quite uncomfortable. And it started off with a failure in a boardroom in terms of my perceived performance. And so then I went back through a process of going through that data, and I literally challenged the agency in question. The clicks have done nothing post-click. And I got this very garbled message. And I then said, I want my money back from Google. I've paid 100 grand. And I'm not kidding, it was 100 grand, one quarter. I've got nothing back. And I'm sat in the boardroom going, I've just wasted 100 grand. The CFO's not very happy. So I literally asked for the data in terms of the clicks because Dan, CEO of another company, said, you need to look at the data in a different way. And I remember it was literally one Christmas. I had a massive Excel spreadsheet, and it's not the sort of thing I want to do over Christmas, but I had a glass of wine, and I went through each click. And I realised I'd been paying for a profile that just wasn't translating. And it was then I started going down, I need to analyse everything in a degree of focus that I'd not had to do in the past. That's the starting point for me. I'm no longer in that role, but I think you then take that and look at the data sources that you're using, and can you get better at getting the data sources in to augment what you're doing on an ongoing basis? How are you refreshing each campaign or each initiative? Have you been using the same data sources and just thinking, dare I use the phrase, repeat the same process and expect a different behaviour? Challenge yourself. Take a look first, and your agency partners and your internal teams.
So and it's also handy, a practical tip. Also, know not to do one with too many repeats on at Christmas time as well. So that's good. Look through, bring your advertising data.
Don't like failing, and I failed in front of the board.
That's a very serious point. But I mean, it is ultimately it's accountability, right? And
Yeah.
the ability to say not my problem is increasingly diminished. I suspect, Preeti, I'm not putting you on the spot, but in an environment where everyone's budgets are under more pressure, you've got to make everything count. So that hence the title, ignorance is no longer acceptable. Tell us, to answer the question there, tell us a bit about your on this kind of journey to understand this and address it. What steps have you taken to try and do this? I appreciate you might be at the beginning of your journey, by the way.
Yeah, and I refer back to a particular specific project, right? So we had quite a significant investment from our board to run a brand program over 18 months. A big part of that investment went into our digital platforms and different types of digital advertising. So not the programmatic, out of home, but also paid social and that sort. For us, it was just how do I start to look at where do I start? Like we could go really wide and start to target everybody we think is important, or we start to kind of run small tests. So identify the audience that are the most important to us, get them engaged, and then start to go wider and wider. And as we get engaged on one platform, move them into another platform that may be a bit more costly, but at least we know we're targeting people that have already engaged, and so we can nurture them on. And that was a strategy that just helped us understand the data that was coming through and take the time to really as a team, figure out like what's the next step. And sometimes I think we've got to try not to. And I think a speaker in the previous session just said you've got to you've got to be able to cut up the elephant in small pieces so you can ingest that. And I think the same went for us in this project. We had to break it up. And then also from understanding what was happening, when we knew someone was engaged in one platform, how do we then say, okay, we don't need to spend more money there because we've got them. Right, let's now move on to the next set. And by doing that, we were able to make our budget go much further.
So it's just a journey of understanding, of optimizing and taking responsibility for that within your team because that's where you get the best results from.
I mean, it's not rocket science. I think but we've got to allow ourselves to be able to do that, because when you do go and present to a board, and these are the questions I got, well, okay, how many of, and my team in the audience will relate to this, how many of your A and B accounts, did you engage? Because they're our top tier accounts. Like, how many of them have engaged? Okay, now you've done that, what's next? What about the rest of our TAM? And to be able to go in and say, like, this is the logical approach that we're taking, this is where we're at, they can start to follow a story, and then they get more confidence, and that's how you increase your investment.
Quickly, I want to see if we've got any other questions. Please raise your hand. I'd love to get some. We've got a couple of minutes left, so if you anything want to ask, raise your hand. There we go. Let's go to Paul's answer first.
No, for the question.
Yeah,
go on, sure.
It's just more about, showing the value of programmatic, because you can't, it's really difficult. Obviously, it's on a brand side and it's more awareness, but you're getting thousands of clicks, but then we're not seeing it on the other side, which is what you were mentioning before. How would you do that with programmatic?
So I think there's a couple of things. I'm conscious of time, but to your point, and I'll come back to what you just said, one of the things I'm having a chat with our CPO and co-founder, and again, to your question earlier on, maybe reframe my thinking, which is I'd start typically with an exclusion list. I don't want to go on that kind of site, that kind of site. And no, you start with an inclusion list. You start small, then learn and scale, as opposed to go wide and then learn and bring it back in. That is a bit of a reframe from me. And then to your point, programmatic specifically, and not in isolation, I would say, with other channels, to your point here. Got a couple of clients at the moment, I can't mention because they're not public case studies, but where they've done traditional B2B, and there's a couple of very well-known platforms, and one of them's here today, but then augmented that with programmatic in parallel, they've seen massive increases in engagement. So they're working, I use the word omnichannel and multi-channel, they're doing the traditional media outreach and spend, but then using programmatic to amplify and to extend that reach off of that platform. And one in particular has done very well and seen 10, 15, 20% increase in their ROI. So it's, and again, to your point, test, fail fast, I think is a term that Preeti uses.
Fail faster, I think.
Fail faster. That's your board, right? But it's not in isolation in any of it, but then think widely across that.
So I'm getting, we've got into the questions, annoyingly, I'm getting mixed signals about how much we've got left. Either very little time or virtually no time at all. I think what we need to say is any last, I mean, you've kind of already said, I think you've kind of said, like, scrutinise what is going on, right?
Challenge yourself.
Challenge yourself.
And your teams and your partners.
Okay. Anything?
And I think, I've just said it, we have to fail faster so that we know where we can place our bets and be confident in the outcome.
Okay, so go forth and fail is what we're saying. That's really good.
No.
Yeah. Thank you, seriously. It's such a fantastic issue. It's really interesting for me personally to uncover something which really urgently needs addressing, and there's opportunity for marketers to improve as teams. Yeah, that's it. Exactly. That's what happens when we overrun, I'm told. So I'll try and wrap up now. Gosh, if I go any further, who knows what will happen. Thank you so much to Preeti and to Paul for this session. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. Over to Carla again.
Thank you, everyone. Big round of applause.